you know what, this is possible for me, what, you know, what driving factor that would have. And I don't know. I mean, we could actually capture that data by looking at sort of the growth in GPAs over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period. So there'd be a couple different ways to measure sort of the impact, which wouldn't be directly associated with what's you would hope that you could associate it with people's awareness of the program.
I could follow up with you too with more data. We just came up with this revenue source. Like,
I know the question I have, the number I'm asking is, it's kind of hard to tell right now because,
right, because percentages are actual numbers. Yeah. And the percentages you wouldn't know until after people start using the program. Right. The actual numbers you might know based on the number of kids in school.
Well, I mean, one of the knocks on Georgia's program was that it didn't have the impact in the minority community that they had originally envisioned. And part of that, to me, becomes that's why we would like to have a marketing budget for this program, because you can't just sort of pass it and people will find out. However, you have to aggressively market it, and the marketing would be targeted at communities where the achievement isn't ideal.
There's another question.
I'm a graduate student at Temple University, and there are a lot of international students at US who came here to get their education. But it's very rare to see students from US to go abroad and get their education abroad. My question is, I think there may be an option to send some students to abroad to get their college education, because education is more expensive compared to the many countries in the world. And from the business point of view, when there is a good or service that is cheaper outside, you export it instead of making it. I think, for example, as a state, there may be some agreements with some governments to exchange programs. For example, maybe send US students to abroad, and I'm sure there is gonna be a lot of countries or universities that are willing to have US students to diversify the university. I think that may be a good option with a lower cost, and it will also increase the diversity and of the US students. Do you think is it applicable?
On a percentage basis, how much cheaper would you say it is abroad rather than?
I don't know. I know I'm from Turkey, and I think maybe it's like 10 or 20% of the tuitions here. And for example, Turkish government has some agreements with some countries, and when they have students from that countries, they apply cheaper fees, cheaper tuitions, and it's like agreement based. So I think it may be a good option to have such.
That's a good idea. I mean, I think if we adopt something like that, then the dollar goes further, and the amount of people that we're able to help, multiplies, because you're basically buying on sale. So
also,
that would be a great
the relationship between Philadelphia and outside world, Pennsylvania.
It's definitely a lot cheaper in other countries to go to school. There's no question.
And the cost here keep rising.
Right.
I think they've gone up. I mean, in 10 years, there's been a 157% increase in the cost of higher education.
Anecdotally, I used to work at the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the issues is it is cheaper, and there are some great schools in other countries, of course. But the problem is, when you talk about undergrads, there's a lot of travel back and forth because they get homesick, they want to come back home, and that's $1,000 plane tickets back and forth. So you got to keep that kind of stuff in mind too. Living abroad, cost of inflation with the EU, it's expensive compared to the dollar, the euro. So a lot of this stuff it's not as cheap as it looks depending on where you go. But there's definitely we should look at that.
I like the idea.
Yeah, it's cool. He likes to travel.
I mean, well, the state wouldn't be paying for the plane tickets. So
right.
our costs would remain fixed. It would be, tuition.
Right. Go ahead.
And also living abroad, maybe depending on the country where they may be cheaper. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Where is federal support in this equation? I mean, did you pursue for any
We-
federal support?
One of the things that we backed out is that with the cost, you know, everybody would have to you know, go through PHIA, which is the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, and the average sort of benefit is about $3,100 from PHIA, and that's all passed through. I'd say 70% of those dollars are federal dollars, and 30% are state. So that's sort of, you know, cost that we backed out because they would get that benefit, you know, from the current infrastructure.
So if no other question, you can continue with the other.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about sort of green jobs, there's been, I guess that's been a buzzword for the past 2, maybe 3 years about green jobs. And, you know, what is a green job? So the legislation I introduced sort of defines what sort of a green job is. And, you know, there's so many different aspects of the green economy that were suited for growth. The best way to sort of cut down, the best way to be green is number one, to conserve. So there's a whole sort of industry that's associated with conserving, putting these lights on timers, making them sort of incandescent, those sorts of things, and then, you know, so, and then making sure that the you know, the homes and everything are fully insulated and those sorts of things. So you have a whole sort of industry that's associated with that. And then you have sort of the alternative fuel, alternative energy sources, sort of production that's in the green economy as well. So we sort of put a frame around what green jobs are. And we also set up, in the legislation I introduced, we set up sort of an incubator to spur companies to come into the state and then to start up here with sort of grants and sort of some loan programs that would support them in their initial startup, because a lot of it's a huge capital investment. I mean, if you're looking into sort of production of the solar panel, production of solar panels here in the States, you know, you need sort of, there's a lot of sort of investments up front that you would need. So our legislation called for, number one, defining what a green job is, and then having a sort of microloan / incubator program for businesses to come into the sector, and also it set forth a sort of the office of the office of an executive director of green jobs, who would be responsible for you know, bringing in new jobs and new companies, and also tracking the data as it relates to green jobs, how many green jobs have been created. And then there's also a workforce development component to the legislation, which would take, you know, people from wherever they are and train them to do, whether it's weatherization, solar panel installation, or any of the other number of green jobs that exist. That's what our legislation sort of called for. And I think it's needed because it's so new. And if we don't take advantage, if we don't sort of grab it by the horns and direct it in a strategic way, you'll have a ton of duplication. And you know, it won't grow as fast as it should, because there's sort of no support system for the industry. And that's what our legislation did. And there's a huge potential for us. I mean, just the activity that could be created just by sort of government action. As you guys know, particularly the city of Philadelphia owns a lot of real estate, whether they be sort of, you know, rec centers, whether they be sort of office buildings where things are happening, and, you know, we could sort of lead the way and it's a smart use of taxpayer dollars, because you're ultimately you're cutting down the other